Hello and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana and today we are going to be tackling a bit of a creative orchid project. I think I'm going to do this video in two parts. The first part is going to be about constructing a cork bark mount for the orchid in a little bit of a creative way. And then the second part of the video will be me taking the orchids out of the pot and putting them on the two mounts that I have chosen. So we're going to be talking through the steps, and this is like my way of doing this, and I'm going to be adding a little bit of an extra touch today to the orchid mount. So maybe you might learn a different or a new way for doing one of these, and I hope that you find this video helpful. Okay, so let's kind of start at the beginning. I have two cork bark mounts here, and one of them I've already done a little bit to. Well, actually, both of them have had a little bit done to them already, so I'll explain that in a second. But we're going to be working with both of these to create the mount in this video, and then in part two I'll actually be putting the orchids on them. Okay, so let me explain the part that I have already done for both of these. At the top I have drilled one hole so that I can make the hanger. And the reason that I'm making a hanger like this is because I have a sort of like a closet rod outside that I want to be hanging this on, so that's the reason why I have shaped this like the top of a coat hanger. So there's one hole drilled, so you will need a drill to accomplish that. And then after this step, or even before this step really, you kind of need to decide which orchid is going to go here, because you need to orient this piece of cork, where is the top going to be. And then you're going to need to drill two more holes to do the cork bark prep. So let me just talk through this one as the first example. So I chose this piece of cork for this little orchid that's falling out of its pot. It's a Cattleya type Landate Charm, a spotty variety. And it's falling out of its pot and it just needs a better home. So I'm going to be putting this orchid on this pot, and it's going to be oriented down this way a little bit, and the top is where I have the hanger. Okay, and so there was one hole drilled here, and then there are two more holes drilled right here, and you'll see what I do with those in just a second. The second piece of cork bark is a bit larger, and so the hole at the top, it's sometimes hard to find. Maybe if you look on the back side, it might be a bit easier. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so the hole for the top is drilled here, and you can see that I have oriented this piece of cork more horizontally than vertically. And then there are two smaller holes right down here, and I'll show you what I'll be doing with those. Now, the reason that I did this cork bark this direction is going to be because I'm putting this Potinara on there. And you can see it has new growth right here, so this is the perfect time to get it on the cork bark. But the rhizome for this one is going from here to here, so it's a very horizontal rhizome. And so in order to be able to keep this on the cork for as long as possible, I'm going to be putting it like this so that it has room to continue growing in this direction. Okay? All right, so I'm going to put the plants aside. I just wanted to show you that because when you prepare one of these pieces of cork, you do sort of have to know what orchid you're going to put on there, because you need to know whether to turn it this way or this way and where to drill the hole for the hanger. Okay, so this piece already had the hanger on it, so I'm going to show you how to put the hanger in this piece. And this is what I do for that. I'm going to take 16 gauge wire. Now this happens to be brass, but there's nothing magical about brass. It could really be just about anything that you would want it to be, whatever you can find at your hardware store. I happen to have this as part of my silversmithing hobby, so it's easy to use it for this purpose as well. And it was on a coil, so you can see that it's needs a little bit of work to straighten it out. I have a pair of nylon pliers that I'm going to use to help straighten it. That is completely optional and certainly not necessary if your wire is already straight, but it helps if you pull on it with the nylon pliers to straighten it out a bit. And once I'm finished with this, then the next thing that you want to do is fold it in half so that you can make the top part of the hanger. Now, I would recommend always starting with a piece of wire that is much, much longer than you think you're going to need, because by the time you put it through the hole and wrap it around the thickness of the cork bark and twist it around a few times, you end up using more wire than you seem like you should, but that's kind of just the way it goes. So I bent it in half, and now I have sort of a fold right there. So that's going to be the very tip of my hanger. And this has to be narrow enough so that it will go through the hole that I've drilled. So I'm just going to crimp it a little bit. Okay. And I think it might be better to actually push it through the back side. Let's do it that way. And I did not crimp it quite enough. Or sometimes you may find that you actually have to drill the hole a bit larger. And my cat Cece hears me talking. She's going to start having a conversation with me here in just a little bit. If you hear a cat in the background, that's Cece. She just wants to talk. Okay. All right, so now that this is through the cork, I'm going to pull it through a good bit of the way. I'm going to bend it around. And now I'm just starting to kind of curve the piece that's going to be the hanger. Okay. And you have to decide, of course, you know, how long you want it to hang down. Okay. So then you get to the top. And now you're just bending the part that's going to be the hanging part. And then you begin to wrap this around. Now for me, this is a lot like just doing a pair of wire wrapped earrings, but and I am having to move around quite a bit because it's not, you know, it's not just super easy to bend this wire, but hopefully I'm staying enough in front of the camera that you can see that I'm just twisting it around the neck of the hanger. And usually 3 or 4 twists is enough. And I'm just going to bend that a little bit more. And you know, the idea here is that it is a little bit rustic looking, that is true. And you'll need a good pair of wire clippers in order to cut off the excess wire. And it looks like I've wasted some wire there, but truly it's not, because sometimes you need the extra length just to work with it. And you could possibly use that wire on a smaller mount. And then you want to bend that wire around so that it's like on the back side. And if it's a little bit rough or sharp, you can use like a file to get off the burrs. Or if you don't have a metal file like that, you can use just a piece of sandpaper to sort of smooth off that cut end. Okay, and so that's another one done. So now we have two that have like a coat hanger, wire hanger at the top of the mount. All right, so let's go back to this smaller one. And both of these now would be finished in the same way. So I have a finer gauge of wire here. This is probably like, I don't know, maybe 24 gauge wire, and I think this is stainless steel, but again, this is just what I had. It's not really anything magical. And what I want to do to prepare this cork mount is take a little bit of sphagnum moss, and I think it might be easier if I get this a tiny bit wet. So I'm going to go to the sink and do that. Okay, and squeeze it out. And I'm going to place the sphagnum moss sort of in between these two holes that I've drilled right here at the bottom where the orchid's going to go. So this is like a little bed for the root system. Not too much, because you still want the roots to be able to work through and get to the bark. And then in my neighborhood, this is just prolific. This is Spanish moss. It's sometimes called graybeard moss, and it just grows from the trees here in Southeast Texas. You can just walk down the sidewalk and pull a piece off of, you know, your own tree or somebody else's tree. And I want to put a little bit of this on the mount because it does help protect the roots and help some of the moisture stay there a bit better. So I'm going to place some of that down at the bottom of the mount. And this is not parasitic at all. It's an epiphyte, just like a lot of orchids, and it's related to like air plants, bromeliads, that kind of thing. It propagates either by seed or by vegetative propagation, which means a little tiny piece of it somewhere will take hold and continue to grow. So that's what I want to see if I can get to happen here. So I'm just taking like little pieces of it and putting it down here. Okay, so your phone always starts ringing in the middle of a video. Okay, so back from the phone. All right, so we're putting that down. And then I think this small piece, yeah, this should probably work. Okay, so I have to find the hole that I drilled on this side and put the wire through. And I want to make sure that I catch the moss and, well, the sphagnum moss as well as the Spanish moss. I want to make sure that I catch it because this is how it's going to stay on here until the roots are actually able to intertwine with it and attach to the cork bark. Okay. And then on the back side, you just take the 2 pieces of wire and twist. And then clip off the excess. Okay. And we are finished. So the next part of the video will be about taking this orchid and mounting it to the top of that. Looks like it already wants to go. It wants to be out of that pot. Taking this orchid and attaching it to the top of this and putting maybe a little bit of moss on top, and then we have a decorative cork bark mount for our orchid. Okay, so let's do the second one just for good measure. This one is going to require a little bit more because it's horizontal. So let me get the rest of my moss wet. Now, you might be expecting me to attach the orchid with wire, but that is not what I use to actually attach the orchid. I'm using very sturdy 16 gauge wire for the hanger and very thin wire to hold the moss. The moss is on there. But when it comes to the orchid, I do use something different. So you'll have to stay tuned for part 2 of the video to see how I do that. And I'm not going overboard with this moss because the idea here is that it will kind of propagate itself and grow just like it would if it were on a tree. Okay, here's another piece of thin wire. And we have to find those other holes that I drilled. And again, you want to just work with enough wire so that you don't cause yourself any extra headache. It's difficult to do anyway, and if you're trying to work with a piece of wire that's just too short, it just causes even more difficulty. Okay, flip it over. Just give it a twist a few times. And then cut off the extra. And there we have it. We have our cork bark prepared now for the orchid. And once I put the orchid there, I will be attaching it with something different and maybe adding a bit more moss. And hopefully that will be a nice new happy home. Okay, so this is just part 1. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please hit the like button, and the subscribe button will be in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.